comic book movie. All right, Kevin. So I guess first question: what is the meaning of life?
you got the fun question out of the way. I can't really answer that. That's why I
No,
kept the credits
understandable.
in the
I had
short.
to ask. Yeah. So like the seeds for this short were more or less planted in Seoul. Um, so were you already working on this project during the production of that, or did this come about after the fact?
This came about in the last 6 months of Seoul. We start talking about the potential of doing a little short attached to our features. They used to go on the DVD. Now it goes on Disney Plus.
Yeah.
And so this was one of the ideas that came up. The 22 backstory was something we talked about all during the making of Soul. We delved deeply into Joe's life, but we just showed 22, in the movie. We didn't go too much into her past. So we had a lot of conversations as we were making Soul about what made her the way she is.
And so like the movies or the short sort of starts out like she's kind of cynical from the get-go versus like some of these other ones are a little more optimistic and they're just ready to go live life. And then we learn that she eventually does find her purpose in Soul. So were there any like internal discussions to like explore maybe even like further like what made her so cynical, or is that just a character trait from when we meet?
I see it as sort of, if this were a story about a feature-length movie about 22, the short would be the midpoint. She's Soul number 22, and we do this in numerical order. And by the time the short takes place, we're probably up to maybe 1 billion, number 2 billion, I don't know. And then in the feature, we're up to 20 billion or something. So maybe later in the short. So it's, like I said, like sort of a midpoint. She's had this series of disappointments, and this is the point where it sort of crystallized for her, and she comes up with a concrete plan to deal with her disappointment.
Gotcha. And so like you said it came about in the last 6 months or so. Is that typically the time frame that it takes for one of these animated shorts to get made, like 5-10 minutes?
Yeah, in this case, some of our, I think the Spark shorts take longer. A lot of times with the shorts, what happens is we have to fit into the production schedule at the studio. So you might storyboard a short and then have to wait until layout or animation there's a sort of opening there, because when the features are in peak production, they use more resources and they get priority. But in this case, what we did was, as departments would wrap off the feature, we would grab people before they went on vacation. And so we just we were staggered sort of right behind the feature, and just, grabbing people before they completely wrapped.
So in that, like when you're doing Tina, were you able to record her like in studio, or did she have to record from home because of the pandemic?
She had to record from home, but fortunately her husband has a home recording studio, so that one was that one was actually pretty easy compared to a lot of, some of our especially the first few months, our productions trying to figure this out was an undertaking.
And then like from the editing standpoint as well, how did that really like affect your job, like when you were working on Soul and when you're working on this? Was it that much different, like working from your home office versus like going into the studio?
Yeah, fortunately for me on Soul, the really heavy lifting and editing was over. We were really deep into production. We were into animation. So at that point, from an editing point of view, I'm just doing little tweaks and things. I'm not doing like all day cutting dialogue. And so I was lucky in that respect. For the short, I did not, I had an editor, Noah Newman. So fortunately, I didn't have, I wasn't doing that. Yeah, working from home with editing is hard because of sometimes you get this lag and things aren't in true sync. And that's that's really painful for us. So I think editors will be the first ones going back into the studio.
Yeah. And so I love that apocalypse joke. Did you guys have like a collaborative effort, like when you're writing the script, or was that something that just like one person
That
came up with?
well, I am like that's one of my Apocalypse Now is one of my favorite all-time movies, so I was happy to get that in. The original script Josh Cooley wrote, he had the name of the club was Chaos, and I reacted to that. Um, my brain immediately went to the TV show Get Smart, which I grew up with and I
Yeah.
loved, and I thought, oh, that's what people are going to associate this with. I don't know if that's true. And so we sort of brainstormed, came up with apocalypse, and then Josh came up with the funny, acronym, filling in the words for the acronym.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I love Apocalypse Now too.
Yeah.
Um, so like now that we've seen sort of like this beginning of 22. Did you guys ever talk about maybe exploring like what becomes of her on Earth? I know like we kind of get to leave it to our imagination, but have you
Right.
like had internal discussions?
Yeah, early on we did. And I mean, obviously, we explore so many things as we're making these movies. I vaguely remember talking about even, yes, there was at one point there might have been an epilogue where we did that. And ultimately, yeah, personally, I find it more satisfying letting the audience imagine. And I think that was the right call to not do that. But for the moment, there's no real discussion about exploring that yet. You know.
Gotcha. And were there any like, did you ever have any plans to maybe intersect this story with Soul, like where maybe Joe arrives in The Great Before?
Um, not, we were working, like I said, these happened fairly spontaneously and quickly. So we explored different ideas. Yet there was a Terry version of, not in this version of the short, but there was a Terry idea to just do a short about Terry. There was one to do, we had an idea to do it about the cat lady and the cat. And eventually we just landed on 22.
Okay. And yeah, I think she was like an instant fan favorite pretty much.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
is there like was there anything that like you kind of thought up like while making the short and Josh's script and everything that ended up like you just ended up cutting on the cutting room floor or anything like that?
We were moving quickly. Yeah, there were, the first scene was a little more complex. It was Pete Docter really helped us with that, where we got a little bit, it was just for a 5-minute short, it was just trying to make the setup more complex than it needed to be. Trying to go into the relationship, deeper into 22's relationship with the counselors. There was a little back and forth there. And just in the interest of clarity and brevity, we ended up cutting that out.
Gotcha. And then so like I mean, film editing is a lot of fun. I like to dabble. I'm no expert like you, but like so how did you get started in this career and then like now you're like 20, 30 years into it?
I got into it the old-fashioned way through my family. I'm like I'm third generation, not editor, but my grandfather worked in film labs in LA. My dad started in film labs and ended up in he was post-production executive at MGM. And so he introduced me to people and got me into the union. And I worked, I started as an apprentice editor and worked with just learned long apprenticeship with some really great editors.
Awesome. And so I guess like I've always been curious about the whole process at Disney. And so like when you're picking an animated project, like does the director approach you or like do you select what you want to work on or like when does that start? Like when you did like Soul, Toy Story 4 and all that stuff, and then how's that whole process work out?
There's a lot of different ways. People, the most traditional or the most common way at Pixar is you pitch an idea and then it gets selected or not. Some people, potential directors are given time and development to come up with ideas. And then if the studio decides to go with one of them, then they, go ahead and develop it. So in my case, I wasn't part of the pitch process necessarily. I came in to direct basically.
Gotcha. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Kevin. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Um,